My name is Hugo Lopez, and today I'm presenting you a paper called Business Process Compliance Using Reference Models of Law. This is a collaboration with my collaborators Søren Dubois, Thijs Lats, and Thomas Hildebrand from the University of Copenhagen, the IT University, and DCR Solutions. So this in one slide, this paper in a slide is about how do we provide compliance checking. And compliance checking meaning the alignment of objectives between regulatory normative requirements and business process or business process models in this particular case. This means that we need to provide ways of formalizing the law and also of checking whether these formalizations are correct. We want to do that because we want to, at the end, provide certain trustworthy implementations that will be running for instance, case management systems in Italian and Danish governments. So this also aims at supporting the type of different work spectrums that we have in process management. So you can have certain completely unrestricted processes. That's basically brainstorming or other sort of explorative work in which you don't have any rules. Or you have on the other side of the spectrum more processes from the management perspectives, from manufacturing perspectives, in which you have, for instance, a context that is more restricted, more small, so you have less alternatives, but you know that they're gonna be correct. Finally, you have knowledge work, and in knowledge work, you do still have certain objectives, certain goals, but discretion plays a big part. You decide, or a caseworker or a knowledge worker in this case, knows what alternatives should take, and he doesn't want to be restricted as much. He still needs to live up to the objectives of the process, but there will be certainly more alternatives to it. And that is basically where we are aiming at providing compliance. So the idea is, the objective of this paper is to see whether we can navigate these different processes and still provide compliance to the objectives. So these approaches materialize in a dichotomy between declarative and imperative process models. Imperative process models are the standard of the process management perspectives. This is basically BPMN and all EPC languages, and they are suitable for traditional and repetitive processes, but well, you certainly have less alternatives, less traces to that matter, and moreover, the compliance checking problem is also quite expensive. So it's been formalized by Colombo Tosato in BPMN 19 and showed that for many of the alternative definitions of this process, this compliance checking lives in the category of NP complete problems for imperative processes. For declarative processes, there is no there hasn't been such a study. So that's one of the objectives of this paper, to provide some complexity measures for that, and well, also because in principle we have kind of a more open universe of traces that we need to consider. So we want to see that. In our paper, we're considering the dynamic condition response graph modeling notation. This is a formal notation that allows us to declare regular and omega regular time properties. And moreover, it's also a modeling notation. So our end users are not really users with formal methods knowledge, but they are coming from the process management or from other domains So we want to support, we want to provide them a language that is rich enough, but we also don't want to cater only people with a formal background. And well, we have a strong collaboration with industry, so there's a lot of engineering in building this for the last 10 years into commercial product. So briefly, what a DCR is, a time DCR formalization that we have in the paper. We have a finite set of events, and we also have a finite set of relations that relate those events. So in this case, we have certain types of relations, and those relations are, for instance, a condition relation that tells you that in order to grant public pension, well, you need to fulfill all the objectives, all the events that are before. So in this case, that has reached the pension age. This enables you to do it without really telling you that you must do that. If you must do that, then you have a response relation, which simply imposes obligations between one event and the other. This actually says that once you have reached the pension age, then you must do to grant a public pension. You also have include and exclude relations that affect the domain of the domain of your the domain of events in your process. So in this case, if you execute lives in Denmark, then you enrich the set of events that you have available at the moment to be able to check whether the citizen has lived in Denmark for the last 8 years. The converse property in this case would be an exclude relation. So once you have executed that has lived in Denmark for the last 10 years, 8 years, then the contrary event has lived in Denmark for at least 3 years is going to be excluded from the domain. Finally, we also have some state for each of these events, and this has basically whether they have been executed, whether they are pending, so there's some pending obligations to be executed, or whether they are included or excluded from the domain. You also have a notion of enabledness, and that's basically that an event is included, it's enabled when it's included and its preconditions have been either executed or excluded from the domain. Moreover, if you have a time condition, then this time condition needs to be respected. So if there's if this says that it has to be executed two events, two time units before, then you need to let those time units pass in order to enable the event. So that's basically formalized into this grammar. You have a fixed set of events and labels, and mapping from events to labels. That's also important. And well, you have a process, and each process is basically a list of markings that associate events with states, and a parallel composition of constraints. We also have a relation for enabling and effects. So basically, the way we read this is that we have a set of we have the marking that associates all the events with a state. We had a process term, and then we want to see whether the event is enabled or not. These are the rules, and then basically this is a relation that is eventful. So every time you execute an event, there's also some consequences for the process for the marking in general, where you execute some, when you exclude some events, you include some other events, and then you put some other events pending. So that means that, for instance, the response relation that we have in the top right means that we, like, if the marking includes that E is included, then E can be executed, and the effect of E for having a response relation outgoing from E means that the effect of that would be to put an obligation on F with a K time unit. We also have an operational semantics. This operational semantics says that basically you can execute, like if an event is enabled, then you can execute that, and the effect of that is going to be applied to the whole marking. You also have a notion of time passing. So as long as the deadline hasn't been is still respected, then you can move on decreasing the time, the deadlines. We go back to the problem of compliance, and the problem of compliance we still have a regulatory space, a process space, and a compliance space. In this, I'm going to be brief. The idea is that you want to compare from the process model, and this process from a process model you have two ways. Either you discover the process using certain process mining techniques, or you define the process using elicitation techniques, for instance interviews or ethnographic approaches. That allows you to generate a process model with certain activities and certain relations. On the other hand, you have a compliance officer. This is somebody with a legal background, with a legal interpretation. And what he is trained to do is to read and understand normative documents. Now, some of these documents might be too generic to be able to be related to our process domain. So we would like this compliance officer to specify this in a formalized way, generating an implementation guideline. Once we have that, then we can generate a formal specification of the guideline in what we call a reference model. These both reference models and process models are prone to soundness and other verification techniques that we are not explaining today. But the important part is that now we have some two models that have on one side legal events and the other hand process events, and you would like to first of all find what is the relation between them, so align these two, and also provide a compliance checking algorithm for that, and that is basically what we're going to discuss later today. So just to give you a couple of examples on how do we model law, I'm just going to take some of the examples that we have in municipalities in Denmark. And this, for instance, a way that we described, this is the thing that we have in the left is a legal paragraph, and on the other side you have the DCR model for that. So what you capture in the event is the state of affairs. Really, so sometimes could be activities, but sometimes it's just the formal recognition that a state has about something that has happened in a case. In this case, we capture that the custodial parent has failed to undertake examination or treatment for a case, and that provides the right. So it says may allow a decision by a children and young persons committee. Notice that this is not really imposing any obligations. The Children and Person Committee might not really perform the consultory examination. On obligations and the relations, we also have notions of aleptic modalities. In this case, the municipal council might decide at discretion to omit consultation of a child, of a case. In those cases, you would need to take some activities out from the context, in this case, perform consultation with a child or young person, but also would include other events, as it says in the law says, the steps shall be taken to establish views of the child and young person. So in this case, you will need to include those events. You also have certain obligations, and these can be omega properties or time properties. In this case, for instance, we have that the municipal council can receive an original report, and for this original report, you might have 4 time units, 4 months, in which If you haven't really generated a complete examination, then you will need to prepare a provisional assessment. But on the other hand, that doesn't take out the fact that eventually in this process you will need to complete the examination. So that is would be with omega time, so to say. So in that sense, it's also similar to the diamond modality in linear temporal logic. We have also some notions of divisibility, meaning that at some point, like if you have in law, that you have a set of facts, and once you combine those facts, you might not generate the conclusion of the union of those facts. And that is because in law you have divisible conditions that tells you that you might have rules contrary to duty. So one of the examples on how to model this is by looking back at this case in which you have two events that contradict each other. So if you are in 8 years, if you have lived in 8 years, you might not need necessarily to achieve that you have been living for 3 years and between 15 and pension age. So that's something that we model using exclusion and exclusion relations. Okay, so that's basically a couple of modeling patterns that we follow in order to model the law. And that's so when we look at legal text, then we need to refine the legal text that we find in GDPR, for instance, onto the domain. So once we have that, well, this is a step that is mostly done by somebody with domain and process knowledge, but then we can generate what we have on the other side, which is the compliance rule. A little bit of engineering. So that means that we require to provide tooling support in order for these domain specialists in law to generate these process models. So what we have here is we've been working quite a lot in a tool called the process highlighter, and what this tool is doing is basically providing a side-by-side relation between what is the law, what domain specialists are used to, which is dealing with laws, but also how can they relate or how can they create processes without really understanding the formal semantics of TCR. So a couple of words on compliance as process refinement. We said that we will cover this now. So what you end up with this is a set of reference models, small models, and then you want to pair that with a process model that you have on the other side. So the question there is, first of all, you need to provide an alignment of the terms. So what do they mean by the term in the compliance rule and the term in the process model? So first of all, we want to identify which one of those are, and you might have different alignments in this. So you might provide different alignments that basically create different instances of the compliance rule in the process model. That means, for instance, if you have different places in which provide sensitive information, and there is an event is saying that you need to delete sensitive information, you will need to provide these pairings. So once we have that, then the question is, how do you acknowledge whether the traces that you can generate on the process model respect the number of traces that you have in the compliance and in the instance of the compliance rule. And that is something that we do via process refinement. So in process refinement, what you have is, well, one legal process and one implementation, one process model. So what you want to do there is to look at language inclusion. First of all, of course, there is a question here in that my process model might have more activities than my legal process. So you want to filter out all the elements in the alphabet that do not belong to the law. You want to change, you want to align the terms before, and then provide for language inclusion. So that's basically what we have. What we call a strong compliance. It's a universal quantified property based on process refinement. Now the question is that in language inclusion isn't hard for DCR processes, for DCR graphs. So we also want to see whether we can actually decrease the complexity class. The good thing is that we have a good approximation to this problem that is called non-invasiveness. In this case, an implementation, a process model is non-invasive to its specification. So in this case, the legal property, if the markings are compatible, and the process model does not include any inclusions, exclusions, or responses in the free events in S. That also means that checking this non-invasiveness is polynomial, so it is actually linear on the number of events of the process model. So some results, compliance checking in this case is decidable. That means that for P and R processes, then I'm provided a set of term alignments, then this is basically decidable, and that providing this reduction to the called non-invasiveness, then we can also say that this is also coming from a polynomial class. So just few words. This has been implemented. Well, this framework of compliance has been implemented in municipalities in Denmark and Italy. What they do is they provide these regulations. We have trained lawyers into the use of this. They generate actually pretty big models, and we try to do simulations and train them all in all the analysis techniques, so to check whether the processes are compliant before they generate this into a case management application. That's basically what a caseworker ends up seeing. Just to conclude, so this work provides theoretical and practical advances towards guaranteeing implementations that are compliant by design. We present a way to align processes, and moreover, we provide the reduction of a problem that it otherwise is NP hard in imperative processes into something that can be checked at polynomial time. But that also brings many adaptations considerations, because we want to bring this to society, and it's how do we find whether humans not training informed models can make the most out of these compliance frameworks. Okay, that is from me. I hope to see you at FASE and ETAPS this year.